to be tying up a new pattern that is based on, or at least a new pattern for me, based on a fairly old pattern, which is the Pheasant Tail nymph. This is not the Pheasant Tail nymph, this is going to be a Pheasant Tail TroutFly, actually tied parachute style. Just saw this the other day and I was like, I gotta give that a shot. The Pheasant Tail was one of the first flies that I learned how to tie, maybe one of the first three, forever ago. So I've got a size 14 extra long hook here in my vise TroutFly. I'm using some black sheer 14-aught thread. When I'm doing like a parachute or anything like that, I'll usually start right behind the eye, and then I'll go about halfway down the length of the shank of the hook here, and then I'm going to come about halfway back, and that's where I'm going to place my parachute or my wing. So today we're going to use just some McFly for the wing. I cut myself an extra long chunk that I can certainly and will trim off. I've got that pulled over the bottom of the hook, and I'm going to take a wrap across and over on one side, and then switch hands. I'm going to tie across and over on the other side. So after I've got that tied in the front and the back, now I'm going to go ahead and take a few wraps just around the post, which is basically the base of this wing material, this parachute that we've got here, and that's just going to help us secure it in place. Plus we're going to beef it up a little bit as we get further on the pattern, and we're going to tie our hackle on that, and our hackle is actually going to be going horizontally instead of vertically. Once I've got that kind of nice and secured in place, I'm going to go ahead and trim some of that off, because it can get in the way a little bit. I'll trim it again at the very end, but let's just get rid of some of it so it's not completely in the way. And with that, I'll just go ahead and we're going to travel down back to the back of the hook so we can start tying in the abdomen on the fly. Starting with the tail, and the tail and the abdomen is tied pretty much the same if you've tied a pheasant tail nymph before, kind of that same kind of way. For the tail here, I'm just going to use some sort of like microfibbetts in a kind of yellow gold color, and take about 4 of those microfibbetts here. I'll get them pretty close to where I want them. I'll take a wrap or two around, and then I can kind of check and see if they're the length that I want. Most importantly, I want them on top of the shank of the hook. Usually my pheasant tail tails tend to be a little bit shorter, but I don't mind this one being just a little bit longer, just to help it kind of stabilize and stay on top of the water. So once I've got that right about where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and just start securing it down, moving forward with a few thread wraps. After I've got a few of those wraps in, I'll go ahead and we're going to trim the butts of these off. I want to leave it pretty much right to the base of the post here, and that will allow us to use those fibers to help us build up some bulk. We will want some taper on this fly. I'll just go ahead and move forward. If the wing starts getting in your way like that at all, we'll be shifting it around. It's really forgiving. And like I said, I'm using McFly here. You can use other materials as well. I'd love to use calf tail or calf body hair as well. So we're going to go about that far down, and we will go ahead and we'll tie in a piece of brassie size copper wire on the side. This is going to both be ribbing, but even more so it's going to be for durability. Just help sustain and support our pheasant tail, which is what we will be tying in next. So I'm going to get that down and secured. So I'm just going to turn to a well-used pheasant tail feather. I've already taken out about maybe 5 or 6 fibers from that. We're going to use that for our body here. I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to go ahead and tie it in right around the middle of that material. Take a couple of wraps, and now I can extract it back to get the length, because we're going to have to travel a little ways. That way is just a little, I find it a little bit easier than trying to get just the tips tied in, because you can just tie it that way and just pull the material backwards. And from there, we're pretty much secure. I'm going to work on our taper just a little bit. I'm just going to take this thread right up to close to behind the post here. And once I'm there, I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise, and that's just going to help us flatten it out a little bit. So to build the taper, I'm just going to go maybe 3/4 of the way down, and then I'm going to come right back up. That's building more bulk up near the eye. Then I'm going to go do the same thing, go about half as far as I did last time, come back up, and then I'll do that one more time. We're going to go even half as far, and then back. Try to not capture any of those fibers, and that should create a good enough taper for us here. So also we've got here, as I've got my thread on the bobbin cradle now, that allows me to work with both of my hands. We're going to attach our hackle pliers to the very end of these pheasant tail fibers. Once I've got them kind of secured in there, we're going to make sure we get that first wrap right around the base. I'm going to avoid that hook point because it will go right through those fibers. And then we're just going to move that one fiber out of the way from my wing. And now we'll proceed. Pretty much just taking touching wraps. We've already got the taper built in from the thread, so I don't need to wrap one on top of the other. You can see I've got one fiber there that was too short, and so it just kind of got away from us, and that's okay. Once I get to about right here, I'm going to go ahead and move our bobbin cradle out of the way. I'm going to take a couple of wraps over the top of that pheasant tail just to kind of lock it in place. I can release that now from my hackle plier. So now that I've got that off, I can just go ahead and grab my scissors. The one escapee here, I can just clip him off. We still have plenty to build the body that we wanted. So once we get about here, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to clip off the ends of that pheasant tail. Got a few of those fibers from the wing in there, but that's going to be okay. We'll stand that wing back up. We'll go ahead and grab our copper wire now, and I'm going to counter rib this, which means I'm going to wrap my copper the opposite direction of what I just did with the pheasant tail. And that will allow that copper wire to lay across those fibers, not in line with them, but across them. And that'll just make it more durable. You already saw how easy it is for those pheasant fibers to kind of break and come off. Counter ribbing like this is going to help you with that. So just go ahead and throw a couple of wraps over our copper wire, and then I'm just going to kind of move it back and forth, let it heat up while I put pressure on it, and it'll just break itself right off. So before we start securing our hackle down, I am going to go ahead and take some wraps back up just to make this post a little bit taller. It's going to give us a little band of thread around the base of that, and that's what we're going to be wrapping our hackle around. So I want it pretty, I don't need it thick, but I do want to keep it nice and compacted. And I think that's good for right at the moment, because we'll just travel back down. That's going to put another layer of thread as we travel back down. making that even more stable. I'll just go ahead and take one wrap there right behind it. I'm just going to use a nice furnace hackle that's got a nice dark stripe down the middle of it. I'm going to tie that in right behind the wing, leaving some of that stem bare. I'll get that first wrap over the top, and then I'm going to go ahead and take a wrap over the back side of it. That'll help us get that kind of perpendicular to the angle of our hook. You can see that stem is almost at a 90-degree angle, and that's what I'm looking for. Right now is a good time to not only disengage some of the hair that's been caught, but it's a good time for me to look at how much of that stem is exposed, because I need some of it exposed to start my thread wraps. And I'm actually going to, after I secure the rest of that feather down, we're going to really secure the hackle to the post rather than to the shank of the hook. So I'm going to go ahead and just take some wraps here to force that stem up towards the front. Then I can just grab my scissors and go ahead and cut that out. With that cut out, let's kind of reach in and kind of pull everything back a little bit, and then we're going to move back down to the base of this post. And from here, with both the feather and the post, we're going to once again start making wraps up. This time though, we're trapping the stem of that feather right up against the post, and that's where we're going to wrap our hackle. It's going to be around the post, not around the shank of the hook, so it makes sense that we're going to secure the stem of the hackle feather to the post itself. So I'm pretty good with that. We'll just go ahead and work our way back down. I do find it easier, especially when I've got a long hackle feather like I've got right here, to just reach in with each of these wraps and just kind of hold everything up and out of the way. I'll just go ahead and finish off right behind that wing. We'll go ahead and finish this thorax off using a peacock eye. I've got a couple of hurls that I've taken off of that eye. I'll clip off just the very tips because they're very brittle. I don't want to cut them too short because the stem gets really thick the further you move down each of those hurls. Once I've got those kind of cut, I'm going to go ahead and get those attached to the hook here. Lengthwise, if it looks like it's going to be over the eye a little bit, I can just pull those backwards after that first wrap. And then we'll go in front of the post here, just trying not to trap the post itself. From there, I'm just going to take the two hackle hurl, or the two peacock hurls, and to twist them up a little bit in my fingers. That's not just to make them a little bit more fluffy, but it will help us kind of keep them together. They have a tendency to like to come apart or spread apart from one another. And we're just going to go ahead and take a couple of wraps behind the post here. And then I'm going to pull everything a little bit backwards to go in front of that post. We'll just take a few more wraps of the hackle up towards the eye of the hook here. And once I'm right about there, I'll go ahead and tighten up my thread just a little bit. I'll take a couple of wraps over the top of those two peacock curls. That's just going to lock them in place. With those couple of wraps in place, I'll take a couple in front. We'll build up a tiny little head here, a bit of a head, not too much. But I'm going to go ahead and clip off the balance of the butt ends of our peacock curl here. After I've built that head up a little bit, we'll just go ahead and grab our whip finisher. We want to take a couple of wraps right behind the eye, but we want to work those wraps back so that this tapers backwards towards the back of the hook. Just get a few wraps in like that. Go ahead and tighten that up. I'm going to go ahead and grab my thread cutter, and we're detached. So the vise I'm using today, it's a Tiemco vise. I'll be doing a review on it. I've been tying with it for a little while. I like to tie with them for a while before I do a review. And I noticed that it had a nice little lever over here, and I decided, okay, if I'm going to do a review, I need to understand what that does. And what I found, what it does, is actually incredibly helpful and very innovative. By loosening that, I can actually move the entire head, or the entire jaws of the vise there, just like that, and then I can tighten it back up. And now I've got my hook in a position where I want it to be to do the post. Usually what I'll do is I'll take the hook out of the vise and I'll put it in this kind of more of a vertical position, tighten the hook back down, but kind of an innovative feature there. We're just gonna, just like we're starting on a new fly, but this time we're going to be just reattaching our thread to the post. And most commonly you're not going to have what I have here. What I have here is I just barely broke out a new hackle feather. It's a whiting feather, a very good feather. I love whiting, but it's incredibly long. So as I tie 5 or 6 flies, it'll get more manageable, but right now it's really long, and so you can see it kind of gets in the way a little bit. So I've just kind of worked my way up the post, and then I'm going to work my way back down to the base, where the post meets the shank of the hook here. Once I'm there, I can go ahead, grab my thread cutter again, and we're just going to cut off the butt end now that we're secured back onto the fly. I'm going to kind of make sure that my post is pulled straight out and away. I'm going to take my first wrap around that post, and what I most commonly do is I'm going to pull this post and hold it firmly in place for at least the first couple of wraps. And from there we're just going to take wraps traveling back down the post until we get down to where that post meets the shank of the hook. Good, right about there. I'm going to take my thread, wiggle it a little bit as I wrap it over the top of that balance of that hackle feather here. And once I've got that kind of secured in place, I'm just going to kind of turn the vise again, just so I have a good view of where that hackle feather is tied in, so I can clip it off nice and close without losing too many of those fibers. About like that. With that, I'm just going to give myself some extra thread. We're going to grab our whip finisher again. We're actually going to whip finish right around the post. I'm trying not to capture too many of those hackle fibers. I'm going to go ahead and release. Pull that down nice and tight. I'll come in with my thread cutter yet again. And release. Pull that parachute up. We'll grab our scissors. I'm going to pull that parachute backwards. I want that parachute to be about the length of the hook itself, right back to the very back of the hook. It's very easy to cut these off too short, and you can't put it back if you did. So I'd prefer to cut them long and then trim it down if I feel like I need to, or want to. So there you have it. The parachute pheasant tail. Like I said, I've tied pheasant tails for 25 years plus now. Never thought of turning it into a dry fly as a parachute, so I'm going to have to give this one a shot. It's a lot of fun to tie. Maybe we'll get really innovative and we'll try a parachute leech next time. Of course, I'm not going to do that. Grab yourself a hook, throw it in the vise, and give this one a shot.